The crystal palace of the Empress glowed under the light of 3 moons. Its tall glass towers reflected the stars, making the place look like it was floating in space. Inside the grand banquet hall, hundreds of alien nobles gathered, dressed in shining robes, their faces painted with colors of pride and arrogance. Music played, but it felt cold, like every note was made to show power instead of joy. At the center of the hall sat the Empress, her crown made of living silver, her eyes sharp like blades. She ruled an empire that stretched across galaxies, and tonight she celebrated her victories. But behind her calm face, her heart was heavy. At her side sat her daughter, the princess, thin and fragile, her legs bound to a hovering chair. Nobles whispered cruel words, thinking no one could hear. They called her weak, cursed her existence, and said she was unfit to be the heir of the throne. The princess lowered her eyes, pretending she did not hear. But the Empress heard everything. Every word was like poison, yet she stayed silent. For even an empress could not silence the hearts of her people with a single command. Among the servants rushing between tables was a young human. He carried trays of glowing fruit and silver cups filled with star wine. He was not special in the eyes of the nobles. To them, he was only a human waiter, one of the many species conquered and forced into service. But to the Empress, he was strange. She had watched him move with care, bowing politely, speaking gently to every guest. He had no power, no wealth, but his presence felt different, like a small flame burning in a room full of shadows. The night grew louder as aliens laughed, drank, and told stories of war. The princess sat quietly, her hands folded, her eyes staring at the polished floor. Then, in the middle of the noise, her voice broke through. "Human," she said softly, looking at the waiter. The hall fell silent at once. The human froze. The tray shaking in his hands, every noble turned their head. It was forbidden to speak directly to a servant during a royal banquet. But the princess had spoken, and no one could ignore it. The human stepped closer, bowing low. "Yes, princess." His voice was calm, though his heart beat fast. The nobles whispered again, their voices sharp. The Empress narrowed her eyes, curious but silent. The princess raised her hand, trembling but firm. "Will you dance with me?" she asked. Her words cut the hall like a blade. Laughter broke from the nobles, harsh and cruel. "Dance? With a human?" One of them mocked. "Does she not know our traditions?" Another sneered. The Empress's fingers tightened on her throne. Her chest filled with anger, but she did not speak. Her daughter's voice had more weight than all the laughter in the room. The human stood frozen, his mind racing. He knew the punishment for touching royalty could be death. But he looked at the princess's face, pale and lonely, her eyes shining with a hope he had never seen before. Slowly, he set down the tray and stepped forward. "I will, princess," he said, his voice steady. Gasps filled the hall. The music stopped. The nobles leaned closer, waiting for the Empress to order the guards. But the Empress did not move. She leaned back, her eyes fixed on the human. Something in her heart whispered to wait. The human reached out his hand, unsure if he was allowed. The princess smiled weakly and placed her delicate hand into his. He pulled her gently from her chair, letting her hover close. The hall was so silent that even the sound of their breaths echoed. Step by step, the human moved, slow and careful. He did not know alien dances. He only knew the simple steps of his people. But he gave her respect, lifting her like she was light as air. The princess laughed softly, the sound pure and warm. It was the first time the Empress had heard her daughter laugh in years. The nobles watched in shock, some with anger, some with awe. The Empress's heart beat faster. Something was breaking inside her, not weakness, but chains she had built herself. Her daughter was alive in that moment, and it was not the power of the empire, not her crown, not her armies that gave her that light. It was a single human, daring to dance when the whole universe told him not to. The music started again, soft and trembling. as if the musicians themselves were afraid. But the sound grew stronger as the human and the princess moved. The empress leaned forward on her throne, her sharp eyes wet with something she had almost forgotten. It was hope. The hall no longer felt cold. Something had changed. And everyone knew the night would not be forgotten. Not by the empress, not by her daughter, and not by the empire. The banquet hall had never felt so silent. The empress watched from her throne, her face cold and unreadable, yet her heart was burning with emotions she could not name. Her daughter, the fragile princess, hovered in her chair, her small hand still resting in the human's palm. The nobles were restless, their whispers crawling across the room like snakes. They expected punishment. They expected the empress to strike the human down for daring to touch her child. But nothing happened. The human stood steady, and the princess smiled. The music was weak at first. Trembling like a leaf in the wind, the human began to move slowly, guiding the princess with steps that were clumsy yet honest. He did not know the alien dances with their complex turns and sharp patterns. Instead, he used the simple dance of his people, a gentle sway, a rhythm of kindness. The princess's body moved awkwardly at first, her chair shifting to keep balance, but the human did not let go. His hand was firm, his eyes steady, and his steps patient. Soon, she relaxed, and for the first time, she felt free. Gasps rose from the crowd. Some nobles laughed, cruel and sharp. Pathetic, one sneered. The heir of the empire dancing like a child. Worse, another hissed, dancing with a human slave. Their words cut through the hall, but the princess did not hear them. Her laughter, light and fragile, grew louder than the whispers. The empress leaned forward, her silver crown catching the glow of the moons. Her heart shook when she saw her daughter's joy. It was a sound she thought she would never hear again. The human kept dancing, ignoring the weight of so many eyes. His steps were not perfect, but they were true. He bowed slightly as he guided her, treating her not as a burden, not as a fragile creature, but as a partner. The princess lifted her chin, her eyes shining. For once, she did not feel broken. She felt alive. Her hand tightened around his, refusing to let go. The empress noticed the change. Her daughter's cheeks glowed with life, her movements filled with courage. The empress felt something strange inside, anger at the nobles, confusion at the human, and something warmer that she did not want to name. Was this joy, or was this weakness? Her empire had been built on strength and fear. Yet here, in front of all her people, a single human showed her something stronger than fear. The nobles grew restless. One of the high generals stepped forward, bowing low, his voice deep. "My empress, this is against the law. Humans cannot touch royal blood. The punishment is death." The hall waited for her answer. The empress turned her eyes toward him, her gaze sharp as steel. "Silence," she said, her voice calm yet deadly. The general froze, his mouth shut at once. No one dared to move. The dance continued. The princess giggled softly, spinning as best she could with the human's help. The hall, once filled with cold laughter, now carried a different sound. Hope. Even the musicians, who had first played with fear, began to find courage in their notes. The melody grew stronger, echoing through the walls of the crystal palace. The nobles, though still angry, could not look away. They had never seen their princess so full of light. The empress remembered the years of silence, the nights when her daughter wept alone. She remembered the cruel words of doctors and advisors who said the child would never live long, never rule, never bring joy. And now in front of her, the impossible had happened. It was not through medicine, not through alien science, but through a simple human touch. The human's heart pounded as he moved. He knew at any moment the guards might cut him down, but when he looked into the princess's eyes, all he saw was trust, and he could not let that trust break. His steps grew stronger, his movements more confident. The nobles could laugh, the laws could threaten, but in that moment, the only thing that mattered was the girl smiling in his arms. The empress clenched her hands on the throne, her silver nails digging into her palm. Why did her chest ache? Why did her eyes sting? She was the Empress, conqueror of worlds, breaker of armies, and yet one human waiter had shaken the foundation of her heart. Was this power, or was this danger? She did not know. The dance ended slowly, the music fading into silence. The princess, breathing fast, kept holding his hand, refusing to release him. The hall waited for the Empress's judgment. The human bowed low, his head bent, waiting for the end. But before the Empress could speak, her daughter's voice rose, clear and proud. "Thank you," she said, smiling. "You have given me back my life." The words struck like lightning. The nobles trembled, some in rage, some in awe. The Empress stared at her daughter, her lips parting but no sound coming out. Her empire was built on tradition, but her child had just broken it in front of all. And she, the Empress, could not find the strength to stop her. The human remained bowed, the princess still held his hand. And the Empress knew, deep inside, that something had begun. A chain had snapped, a seed had been planted. The banquet hall, once a place of power and fear, had become the birthplace of change. The Empress's life, her daughter's life, and the life of her empire would never be the same again. The grand hall was still heavy with silence after the dance. The human stood with his head bowed, expecting punishment, expecting the sharp cry of guards. But nothing came. Instead, the princess kept his hand in hers, refusing to release it. Her eyes bright with a strength no one had seen before. The nobles shifted in their seats, their anger boiling, their pride wounded. They wanted blood. They wanted to remind the galaxy that no one touched the royal family and lived. But the Empress remained still, her silver crown shining, her gaze unreadable. The princess lifted her head, her voice soft yet firm. "Mother," she said, "I want him to stay." Gasps echoed around the chamber. The nobles could not believe what they heard. A princess asking for a servant, a human, to remain at her side. It was an insult to tradition, an insult to law. The Empress's eyes narrowed, her mind burning with 1,000 thoughts. Her daughter had been silent for years, broken by whispers of weakness, crushed by pity and shame. Yet now, after one dance, her voice carried fire. She was no longer the fragile girl hidden in shadows. She was a flame, burning against chains that had bound her for so long. The human's hand trembled in hers. He wanted to pull away, to protect her from the storm that was surely coming, but the princess held tighter. "No," she whispered, "I will not let go." The human looked into her eyes, and for the first time he saw not weakness but strength. A strength born not of muscles or armies, but of courage. The nobles erupted into shouts, their voices like thunder. "This is madness," cried one. "The empire will fall if we let this continue." "Humans are slaves," another spat. "They have no right to stand beside royalty." "End this at once, Empress," a general demanded, slamming his fist against his chest. But the Empress raised her hand, and the hall fell silent. Her eyes moved between her daughter and the human. She could see the chains breaking. Not metal chains, but the chains of silence, pity, and fear, and she wondered, was this weakness, or was this freedom? The human knelt before the Empress, his head low. "My Empress," he said, his voice steady, "I meant no disrespect. I only wish to give your daughter joy. If I must pay the price, I will." The princess shook her head fiercely, tears shining in her eyes. "No, you will. Not pay, not for me, not for their pride." Her words echoed, and the nobles froze. The princess had never spoken against them before, but tonight her voice was sharper than blades. The Empress felt her chest ache. Her daughter's spirit was no longer buried, it was rising. She remembered when her child was born. The healers told her the girl would not live long. They called her weak, broken, a shame to the empire, for years. The Empress had carried that burden, protecting her daughter with silence. But now, here she was, standing not with soldiers or nobles, but with a human servant, and yet she was stronger than ever. The nobles could not accept it. One of the elder Lord stood, his robes glowing with power. If the Empress will not act, then we must. We cannot allow this insult. He reached for the hilt of his ceremonial blade. The hall tensed, guards ready to move. But before anyone could strike, the princess shouted, "Stop!" Her voice rang with authority. The Lord froze, shocked. She raised her chin, her hand still gripping the humans. "If you touch him, you touch me." The Empress rose slowly. From her throne, her long gown flowing like liquid silver, the hall trembled with her presence. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the air like fire. "My daughter has spoken, and I will not silence her." The nobles gasped, some in fear, some in rage. The Empress stepped closer to the human and her daughter, her shadow falling over them. Her heart was torn, yet she knew this moment would shape the future of her empire. She whispered so only they could hear, "You have broken the chains, my child." The princess's eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of pain, they were tears of freedom. The human bowed deeply, unsure of what his act had truly begun. But in that hall, everyone felt the shift. Tradition had cracked, power had trembled, and something new had taken root. The nobles would not forget this night. Some would plot in the shadows, whispering of rebellion. Others would wonder if perhaps the Empress was right. If compassion was not weakness but strength. The Empress returned to her throne, her face calm but her heart storming. For the first time, she had let her daughter's voice rise above the empire. And deep inside, she wondered if this human had done more than dance. Perhaps he had set in motion the rebirth of a world. The princess leaned closer to the human, her smile small but unshaken. "Do not fear," she whispered. "Tonight I am free." The hall remained tense, every noble watching, every heart unsettled. But in that fragile moment, under the light of 3 moons, a bond had formed. It was stronger than law, stronger than tradition. It was the beginning of something the empire had never seen before. The chains had broken, and nothing would ever be the same. The banquet ended in silence. The nobles left the hall with anger burning in their eyes, their pride torn by what they had witnessed. The Empress did not speak further. She dismissed them with a wave of her hand. But she knew their hearts were not loyal tonight. The crystal doors closed, leaving only the Empress, her daughter, and the human servant. The princess leaned against her chair, her hand still gripping the humans as if it were the only anchor she had. The Empress said nothing, her face unreadable, but her mind was a storm. Far beyond the palace walls, in the city of towers, whispers spread quickly. The nobles who had left gathered in secret chambers, their voices sharp with rage. They called the Empress weak. They said she had betrayed the old ways. To let a human touch the princess. One hissed, "It is shame, it is corruption. If she cannot rule with strength, then she should not rule at all." Another growled. The shadows of rebellion began to stir. Back in the palace, the Empress walked slowly through the long corridor of glass, her daughter beside her, the human following in silence. The Empress finally turned, her silver eyes narrowing on him. "You understand what you have done?" she asked, her voice low. The human bowed deeply. "I do, my Empress. If my actions bring punishment, I accept it." But the princess spoke quickly, her voice firm. "No, mother. He brought me life. He gave me strength no one else gave. You will not harm him." The Empress looked at her daughter, stunned by the fire in her words. This was not the weak child who once hid behind silence. This was someone new, someone dangerous. That night, while the palace rested under the glow of the moons, a council of nobles met in secret. They sat around a long black table, their faces hidden by shadows. The High General spoke, his voice deep. "The Empress has grown soft, her heart is clouded. If she continues like this, the empire will fall. We cannot allow her weakness to spread." One of the elder lords leaned forward, his eyes burning. "Then we strike, we break her power, we remove her from the throne." The others nodded, the fire of rebellion growing brighter. And in the corner of the room, a spy listened, his cloak blending with the walls. He would carry this secret to the Empress before the night was over. The next morning, the Empress sat in her private chamber, staring at the rising sun. The spy knelt before her, speaking in hurried whispers. "My Empress, they plot against you. The nobles meet in shadows. They call you weak. They want your throne." The Empress's jaw tightened, her fingers curling into fists. For years she had ruled with fear, and no one had dared speak against her. But one night, one human had shaken her empire so deeply that rebellion now crawled through its veins. She dismissed the spy with a nod, then turned toward her daughter and the human, who stood quietly by the window. Her voice was sharp. "You human, do you know why they hate you?" The human lifted his head slowly. "Because I broke their chains." The Empress's lips curved in the faintest trace of a smile. Though her eyes were heavy, "You speak boldly, but boldness will cost you your life. They will not stop. They will hunt you, and they will use my daughter as their weapon." The princess moved forward, her voice filled with defiance. "Then let them come. I am not afraid anymore." The Empress studied her child, her heart torn between pride and fear. She had spent her life protecting the girl with walls and silence. But now those walls were crumbling. Later that day, the Empress summoned the human to her throne room. The hall was empty, only the guards at the doors. She stared at him for a long moment before speaking. "You are dangerous, not because of strength, but because of truth. One act of kindness has done what my armies could not. It has changed hearts." The human bowed. "If that is danger, then I am guilty." The Empress's eyes narrowed. "Do not mistake my patience for weakness. If you betray my daughter, I will destroy you." The human met her gaze, his voice steady. "I would die before I hurt her." For the first time, the Empress felt something she had not felt in years, trust. But she quickly buried it, for trust was a dangerous thing for rulers. She dismissed him with a wave, yet her mind could not let go of his words. Meanwhile, in the city below, the rebellion spread. Nobles gathered soldiers loyal to their cause. Banners hidden in dark chambers, weapons prepared in silence. The people whispered of change, some in fear, some in hope. The empire was splitting, and it had all begun with a dance. That night, as the stars covered the sky, the Empress stood alone on her balcony. She looked out at her empire, shining and strong, yet fragile beneath the surface. Her daughter slept peacefully, guarded by the human who refused to leave her side. The Empress closed her eyes, her heart heavy. The shadows of rebellion were growing, and soon the fire would reach her palace. And she knew, when that day came, she would have to choose, to rule with fear as before, or to trust in the fragile, dangerous power of compassion. The choice would change the fate of them all. Asterisk. The palace slept under the light of 3 moons. The city below glowed with silver lamps, its towers rising like teeth against the night sky. But not all was calm. In the shadows, whispers moved like smoke, and blades were being sharpened. Nobles who had sworn loyalty by day gathered their assassins by night. Their plan was clear. If they could not strike the Empress, they would strike her heart, the princess, inside her chamber. The princess rested quietly, her hovering chair locked. At her side, the human servant sat nearby, refusing to sleep, his eyes watching the doors and windows. He had felt the tension grow sharper each day, the stares of nobles heavier, the silence of the guards colder. He knew danger was coming, and he could not fail. The Empress, in her own chamber, sat awake. As well, her mind restless, she could feel it in the air. The rebellion was no longer whispers. It was a storm waiting to break. In the deep hours of the night, the attack came. The glass windows shattered with a hiss. Black figures poured into the princess's chamber, silent as smoke, their blades glowing with poison. The princess gasped, her body trembling, fear freezing her voice. But before the assassins could reach her, the human leapt forward, with nothing but his bare hands. He blocked the strike of the first blade. Pain ripped across his arm, but he did not stop. He grabbed the assassin's wrist, twisted hard, and sent the weapon clattering to the ground. the princess screamed, her voice sharp. Guards rushed down the halls, but the assassins moved too fast. One lunged toward her, his blade aimed for her chest. The human threw himself between them, the weapon piercing into his side. His body shuddered, but he stood firm, refusing to fall. The princess cried out his name, tears running down her face. The assassins pulled back, preparing to strike again. But before they could, the chamber doors burst open. The Empress stormed in, her eyes blazing silver. With a wave of her hand, energy exploded across the room, sending assassins flying into the walls. Her voice was like thunder, shaking the palace itself. "You dare touch my blood!" Her power crackled like lightning, wrapping around the attackers, crushing their weapons, their armor breaking like glass. The assassins screamed as shadows burned away from their bodies. Within moments, the room was silent, their figures broken upon the floor. The Empress's chest heaved, rage boiling in her veins. She turned to her daughter, who was sobbing, her small hands gripping the human's blood-soaked arm. The sight froze the Empress, for in her daughter's tears she saw not weakness but love, and in the human's face, pale but unyielding, she saw loyalty stronger than any soldier had ever given her. The guards rushed in, bowing low. "My Empress, the city is stirring, rebellion has begun." But the Empress barely heard them. She knelt beside her daughter, her hand hovering above the human's wound. He gasped for breath, but his eyes never left the princess. "I promised," he whispered, his voice weak. "I will protect her always." The princess shook her head fiercely, her tears falling. On his hand, "No, you will not die. I will not let you die." The Empress's hands glowed with silver fire, pressing against the wound. Her power, meant for war and destruction, now turned to heal. The human cried out, but he did not let go of the princess's hand. Slowly, the bleeding stopped, though the wound would leave a scar. The Empress stared at him in silence. Why would a human servant give his life so freely? Why did her daughter look at him with such fierce devotion? She, the Empress of countless worlds, had commanded fear for centuries, yet one human had earned love in a single night. The guards dragged the broken assassins away, their whispers filling the halls. The nobles had made their move, and the empire was trembling. The Empress rose, her silver eyes burning. "Bring me the council," she ordered. "I will know which of them dares to betray me." The guards bowed and hurried to obey. The princess clung to the human, her small body shaking. The Empress watched them, and for the first time she felt powerless. Not powerless to stop her enemies, but powerless to stop what was growing between them. Love, trust, something deeper than the iron laws of her empire. She feared it, but she could not destroy it. Not when it gave her daughter strength she had never seen before. Outside, the city roared with unrest. Fires burned in the distance. Soldiers marched through the streets. The rebellion had begun. Inside the palace, however, a quieter war raged, a war inside the Empress's heart. Would she cling to the old ways of fear, or would she embrace this fragile, dangerous power called compassion? The answer would decide not only the fate of her throne, but the fate of the galaxy. The palace stood under heavy silence after the attack. The air still carried the scent of smoke from burning torches outside. Whispers of rebellion filled the city, and even the palace walls seemed to tremble. The nobles had revealed their hand. They wanted the throne. They wanted the Empress gone. But more than that, they wanted the human who had dared to touch the princess destroyed. Inside her chamber, the Empress watched her daughter sleep. The girl's fragile hand rested in the human's, who sat beside her bed despite his wounds. The scar on his side still burned, but he refused to leave. The Empress studied them in silence, her mind torn. Her empire demanded blood, demanded order, demanded punishment, but her heart whispered another path, one she had never dared to walk at dawn. The council of nobles gathered in the throne room. The hall was tense, the marble floor echoing with the sound of boots and rustling robes. The Empress entered, her crown of living silver glowing in the glimmer. Morning light. She sat on her throne, her face carved from stone, her gaze sharp as fire. The nobles bowed, but their eyes were filled with defiance. One of the elder lords stepped forward, his voice loud and bitter. "My empress, your rule is stained, your judgment clouded. You allow weakness to sit at your side. A human slave has touched the royal blood. He even bleeds in her chamber, and yet he still lives. This insults our laws, our empire, and our history." The hall filled with nods, voices rising in agreement. "Kill him," one shouted. "Restore honor. End his life, and the rebellion will fall silent," another growled. The human stood at the edge of the hall, his head bowed, his body weak but his eyes calm. He knew they were right about one thing. His life had become a storm that threatened the Empress's throne. He did not fear death, but he feared leaving the princess alone. The Empress lifted her hand, and silence fell like a blade. Her silver eyes cut across the hall, and the nobles trembled under her gaze. "You demand his death," she said slowly, "because you fear him, not because he is weak, but because he has done what you never could. He has given my daughter strength. He has given her hope. He has broken the chains you all placed upon her with your whispers of pity and shame." The nobles shifted uneasily, their mouths opening but no words coming out. The Empress's voice grew stronger. "You call compassion weakness, but it is stronger than all your armies, stronger than fear, stronger than law. If that is weakness, then I will rule with it." The hall erupted in gasps, some nobles falling to their knees, others trembling with fury. The High General stepped forward, anger burning in his eyes. "Then you doom us all. Mercy will shatter the empire. If you choose this path, you are no longer fit to rule." The guards tensed, their hands on their weapons. The Empress rose from her throne, her presence filling the hall like a storm. Her gown shimmered like liquid silver, her crown burning with light. She raised her hand, and the general froze where he stood. Her power wrapped around him like iron chains, lifting him into the air. Her voice thundered, "I am the Empress. I decide what it means to rule, and I choose compassion." She released him, and he fell to the floor gasping. The hall was silent. No one dared to speak. The Empress turned toward the human, her eyes steady. "You will not be punished. From this day forward, you will remain at my daughter's side, not as a servant, but as her protector." Gasps echoed. Nobles stared in disbelief. The human bowed deeply, his voice steady. "I will guard her with my life." The princess, who had entered quietly behind them, spoke with tears in her eyes. "Mother," she whispered. "Thank you." The Empress looked at her child, and for the first time in many years, she allowed her own voice to soften. "You are my strength, my daughter, and he has given you the courage I could not." The nobles burned with silent rage. Some knelt out of fear, others turned their eyes away, but in their hearts, rebellion still stirred. The Empress knew it would not end here. The shadows would rise again, the nobles would strike again. But her choice had been made, and she would not turn back. That night, as the stars returned to the sky, the Empress stood on her balcony. Her daughter laughed softly inside the chamber, the human at her side. The sound carried through the halls, warm and alive. The Empress closed her eyes, her chest aching with both fear and peace. She had broken centuries of law with a single choice. The empire might burn for it, or it might be reborn. Either way, the future would never again belong to fear. It would belong to compassion, to courage, and to a fragile human who had dared to dance. Asterisk. The city was restless under the stars. The rebellion had not ended, but the palace stood stronger than ever, guarded by loyal soldiers and watched by the Empress herself. Rumors spread across the empire. Some called the Empress weak, others whispered she had changed, and many wondered if her new path would bring ruin or hope. But inside the Crystal Palace, another truth was being written, a truth not made of swords and laws, but of love and courage. The princess awoke at dawn, her fragile body still weak but her spirit blazing. Beside her stood the human, scarred yet Unbroken, his hand resting gently on hers, the Empress entered quietly, her crown catching the golden light of the rising sun. For a moment, she simply watched them, her daughter's smile, the human's steady presence, and the way the two seemed bound together by something deeper than tradition. The Empress's chest ached with a feeling she could not control, pride, fear, and something close to peace. That day, she summoned the entire court. The nobles filled the hall, their robes flowing like rivers, their faces hard with suspicion. The air was heavy with tension, every breath sharp as glass. The Empress stood before them, her silver eyes steady, her voice carrying across the hall like thunder. My empire has stood for centuries on fear, but fear cannot heal, fear cannot build, fear cannot give life. Last night I chose compassion, and I will not turn back. The hall rippled with gasps, some nobles lowering their heads, others clenching their fists in rage. The High General stepped forward again, his voice shaking with anger. Then you betray our history. You betray our law. The Empress's eyes cut into him. I betray nothing. I save what is left of us. The old ways are chains, and chains break when hearts demand freedom. At her signal, the doors opened. The princess entered, her chair gliding smoothly, the human walking beside her. The nobles murmured in shock, for she held her head high, her eyes filled with fire. The princess's voice rang through the hall. I am not broken. I am not weak. You whispered those words all my life, and you were wrong. This human gave me what none of you ever did. Respect, courage, joy, if you call that weakness. Then I will wear it proudly, if you call it shame. Then I will rule with shame upon my crown. The court froze, her words striking deeper than blades. The Empress stood tall, her daughter's voice lifting the throne higher than any law. The human bowed deeply, but his presence was no longer that of a servant. He was seen by all, not as a slave, not as a tool, but as the protector of the princess. Outside the hall, the people gathered. Drawn by the sounds of the speech, they listened as the Empress declared her new law. From this day forward, compassion is not weakness, it is strength. Humans are no longer slaves in this empire. They will live with honor, for they have shown us a truth greater than fear. The crowd erupted in voices, some in shock, some in anger, but many in awe. For the first time in generations, they saw an empress who spoke not only as a ruler, but as a mother, as a heart. The rebellion shook at its roots. For what cause could they cry now, when the Empress herself had chosen change? In the days that followed, the empire trembled with transformation. Some nobles abandoned their plots, unwilling to fight against a ruler who had found new strength. Others still whispered in darkness, but their numbers grew weaker. The people watched closely, curious if compassion could truly hold an empire. Together, the princess grew stronger each day, her laughter echoing through the halls. The human never left her side, his scar a silent reminder of his promise. The Empress, though still feared across the stars, began to feel something she had long forgotten, hope. She still ruled with power. Her armies remained unmatched, but her heart no longer leaned only on fear. Now it leaned on the fragile bond she had once tried to deny. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the Empress stood on her balcony. Below her, she could see the people gathering in the streets, singing, talking, alive in ways she had not seen in years. Behind her, the princess and the human danced slowly in the chamber, their laughter soft but clear. The Empress closed her eyes, the sound wrapping around her like a cloak. Her life had been carved by war, her empire built on fear. But in the end, it was a dance, a fragile human hand, and her daughter's smile that changed everything. She whispered to herself, "This is the new dawn." The moons rose above the palace, the stars burned brighter than ever, and for the first time in her long reign, the Empress felt that her empire had a future worth fighting for. Not a future of endless war, but a future of compassion. A future where chains were broken and love was stronger than fear. Asterisk.